Welcome back to Megaman 11. In the last video, we defeated Blockman. So here, if you go back, you can check on the shop. Okay, let me turn the sound down on this real quick. My video is a little bit loud there. We're going to go in weakness order here, so I'm going to Acid Man. Acid Man is this game's water level, actually, which is not too surprising. There's got to be at least one water stage. Ow! So we got Block Dropper, and Block Dropper is actually one of this game's best special weapons. Oh, right there. The watercolor changes depending on what kind of chemical is actually put into said water. If it's blue like it is now, then you don't take any damage. But as you saw before, the water was green, which means it was acid. So if there's enemy, so if you jump into the water when it's green, you'll take damage. The thing is, even when enemies jump into the water, they'll take damage. So you actually get mild achievements in this game, which I've already gotten. But you get an achievement for having enemies jump into the acid and destroying themselves, which is pretty funny. But as I mentioned earlier, this is this game's water level. So as water physics tend to work in Mega Man, when you're underwater, you jump higher. There's also a current constantly pushing you, so you have to keep track of yourself with that. It's not too terribly bad, but then you also have this stuff behind you that you have to keep track of. It will try and push you into the spikes, but this is the introduction to the gimmick, so it's not too bad. Although you have to be careful, because the second you stand on any solid ground, you're going to it's going to start pushing you. Right here is showing off how useful the special weapons are in this game, particularly Block Dropper. It's one of the better weapons in this game. It has a nice area of effect coverage where you can drop multiple blocks on things, which makes taking things out above you pretty simple. You also have to deal with the shield attackers. This game does drop bolts. Depending on the difficulty level that you're playing on, you'll get more bolts or less bolts depending on the type you're playing it. The harder the difficulty, the less likely you're going to get item drops. You can also shoot the acid out of the sky before it falls into the water if you're fast enough. So as long as the water is not green, you can still stand in it, but after about 3 shots, because I think this goes from blue to yellow to red to green. So you got about 3 to 4 shots before it actually becomes acid. So you got plenty of time, or you can just ignore it altogether and just not touch the water. It's just actually pretty simple to avoid the water altogether. Those spider enemies, if they descend down, then when you shoot them, that's going to be when they drop a bunch of smaller spiders, so be careful about that. So here's where the stage becomes more like a traditional water level, where the current is going to be pushing you around and stuff, and then there's a bunch of spikes on the ceilings, on the walls, so you have to keep track of how you jump, like in most water stages in Mega Man, where the longer you hold down the button, the higher Mega Man's going to jump, so keep that in mind. But thankfully the game is nice enough on certain difficulties. I think in most difficulties that 1-up is still there. But then we got mini bosses here. Just keep track of how long you're holding the button down. And right here I'm going to show off that using the special weapons on the mini bosses themselves actually takes them out rather nicely. All the mini bosses in the stages are weak to the same weapon that the boss is going to be weak to, so keep that in mind. So in this case, this boss is weak to Block Dropper because Acid Man himself is also weak to Block Dropper. So you can use that to your advantage, or if you want, you can just save the weapon for when you get to the boss himself. Personally, since the game gives you a lot of drops pretty frequently, I don't feel the need to have to save up weapon energy. Here's where the stage gets a little bit frustrating, as you can see how I'm being a little more cautious with the jumping here. Because I'm going to be completely honest here, even though I've beaten this game quite a few times, even in this run I had a few deaths. I'm not perfect at Mega Man despite the fact that I play it a lot. but I'm not going to pretend like I'm perfect at this game either. You're going to see me die a couple of times in this playthrough. But keep in mind that you do have the speed and power gears, so if you're having difficulty avoiding things, use the speed gear. It's what it's there for. I often forget that there's one of the new things they added to Mega Man 11 is the power wheel. With the right analog stick, you can actually select your weapon without going into the pause menu, and the wheel is designed the same way as the boss select screen. So since I beat Blockman, the block dropper's in the top left corner where Blockman's stage was in the stage select screen. So if you keep that in mind, you can actually select your weapon really quickly if you know exactly what weapon you want and what order the stages are in the select screen. I personally haven't memorized that because while I have played a lot of Mega Man, I haven't played this game as often as I've played the other 10 games. Man, it's interesting to say the other 10 because there's a lot of classic Mega Man. Technically, the other 11 because Mega Man and Bass, which I've only played like once of because that game is ridiculous. Well, anyway, that jump right there, I actually had to re-record this stage a couple of times because I missed that jump quite a few times, and I just didn't want to have to show that I like died like 4 times to that jump. But you got moving platforms and you're underwater, so it's very easy to mistime your jumps and such. And what I'm trying to do here is do a little bit of a speed run of using Rush Coil to jump up, but the moving platform is making that a little bit difficult to do. And I would recommend avoid trying to fight that shield enemy there, unless you're going to try and use Block Dropper on it, and in which case that's not working out as well for me as I hoped, because it keeps hitting the front of him when you have to hit him from behind. Ugh. And now you see why I was nervous about making the jump up there, because there are spikes on that ceiling, and I have mistimed that jump more times than I can count, actually. More times than I care to admit, but that was back when I originally first played this game, and I still remember that. One other thing to keep in mind of the checkpoint system in this game. It varies depending on the difficulty that you're playing. Also, that jump there is a lot harder than I made it look. It's actually harder than it looks. My suggestion for that is you just hold down the jump button and press forward at the same time. As soon as you let go of the jump button, Mega Man will fall back down again. So, as long as you let go just before you hit the ceiling, you should be perfectly fine. But anyway, as I was saying before, since this game has a difficulty select similarly to Mega Man 9 and 10, the stage is actually changed depending on the difficulty that you're playing on. So, this stage could be a little bit harder. Anyway, here's Acid Man. His weapon is the Acid Barrier, which, if you're not using his weakness, you have to just keep shooting through his Acid Barrier until it goes away. And then he'll shoot acid bullets at you, which is pretty simple to dodge. Then his gear is the speed gear, which he will jump into the acid, and then if you jump over him, he will launch up at where you were standing, similarly to how Blockman jumped to where you were standing, and then he'll jump out and shoot acid bullets at you. Pretty simple to dodge. I got a little bit reckless and careless, but as long as you keep spamming the powered gear and the block dropper, he'll go down pretty fast. As long as you have more health than he does, you should be okay, even if you take a hit or two. So for defeating Acid Man, we get the Acid Barrier, which is actually one of the better shield weapons in the game. Also, another thing I didn't mention, a nice touch that this game does that the other original games never did was whenever you use a special weapon, Mega Man's armor actually changes to reflect what the weapon he's using is. So when I was using Block Dropper, his Mega Buster turned into a stone arm, similarly to what Blockman had when he was using the weapon. As for with Acid Barrier, you have the acid mask on like Acid Man does. So the acid barrier, it's a shield, which,
Back, Megaman.
as most shields do, it deflects, it destroys projectiles. But if you use the powered gear while you're using it, it'll actually splash off acid acid drops, which will damage the enemy if you're close enough to them. It's a pretty useful shield. It's still not as overpowered as the Jewel Satellite. That's still the most overpowered shield weapon in the entire franchise, but it's close. It's close.
Are you sure? Ta-da! Are you sure? Ta-da! Are you sure? Ta-da! All ready. Are you sure? Ta-da!
Yeah, Roll says that every time you make and weapons, every time you select an item. I think it's adorable, but I can understand if it gets kind of annoying. Roll's voice actress is Erica Lindbeck. She's pretty much in everything nowadays, which is pretty great. Megaman is also voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, which is also kind of great. Actually, all the voice actors in this game are pretty fantastic, I gotta say.
Welcome back, Megaman.
So what I was doing here is I was wondering if there was more items that are in the shop yet, but I haven't done enough to actually activate more items. So we're just gonna move on to the next stage, which is Impact Man. Who, fun fact, is actually one of the 2 Robot Masters whose names are different in the Japanese version. In the Japanese version, Impact Man's name is actually Pile Man, like Pile Driver. And there's another Robot Master in this game that has a different name in Japanese. Now, what you're seeing me do here is constantly turning on and off the speed gear, because, as I mentioned earlier, the items in the shop upgrade depending on certain criteria that you do. So there is an upgrade to the speed gear that you can buy later that you can only get if you've used the speed gear a certain number of times in a stage. So I'm trying to activate it as many times as I can to get it to show up. And also here is showing off that the acid barrier is actually really, really helpful if you use it in conjunction with the power gear. And I mistimed my jump there. Like I said, this is not a perfect run. I make mistakes, and I was being overconfident in showing off the acid barrier, which caused me to mess up there. Oops. Oh well, thankfully it was right at the beginning of the stage, so not too big of a deal. Embarrassing, but hey, we all make mistakes. So, Impact Man's stage is very similar to Guts Man's stage. Sort of. I mean, it's got the similar moving platform gimmick, just without it dipping you into the floor. Although from the last minute or so ago, you wouldn't think that, considering how I made that amateur jump there. Whoops. But there's also another interesting little gimmick that we'll get into later on in the stage. Again, I really love Block Dropper. Also, again, with the Switch, I apologize. It's the last time I'll bring this up, but since I am playing this on the Switch, every once in a while I will get notifications about people that are playing other things, but that's okay. I know I can turn those off, but I always forget to do that. And I've already recorded the entire game, so it's too late to do anything about it now. As I was mentioning earlier, this stage is very reminiscent of Guts Man, not just because Impact Man is a construction robot. It's just a lot of it's kind of a combination of Guts Man and Stone Man's level. I say Stone Man because I mean there's a lot of underground stuff. There was also a stage in Mighty Number 9 that looked very, very similar to this. What you're doing here, this is actually Impact Man. He actually is made up of 3 other separate robots. That's something you can do. That's something that you can actually read up on in this game. Is you can look up the boss bios that give a little bit of backstory on who they are. That's something that other Let's Players have gone into. So I'm not going to go too far into that. Oh, careful about that welder robot that I destroyed earlier. If he actually does manage to poke into the ground, he actually does make a burning spot on the floor that'll damage you, so be careful about that. And so the acid barrier earlier is actually extremely helpful for spots like this, where you're going to be getting targeted by multiple things at once. Try not to overuse it, because you are going to need it for the boss itself. But you can farm for weapon energy if you need to. As I was saying before, there are actual bios for the robot masters. You can actually look into those in the options menu. And here I was waiting to see if the hotspots here would disappear, but they don't. So you just have to be a better jumper than me to jump in between them, but that's okay. The fun fact too, when this game was first announced, this was pretty much the big stage that they showed off the most of in the trailers. This isn't the music that was playing during the trailer. We'll get to that stage soon enough. But this particular room here is the big one that they showed off in the trailer. I remember GameXplain doing a mini analysis on the stage itself, because this is the only stage that we had good confirmation on what was going on with it. And like I said before, it's very reminiscent of Gutsman's stage, with the pickaxe throwing mets and the moving platforms and stuff. So the weird thing, so the big gimmick here is Impact Man is going to be throwing these enemies at you. These 3 enemies here are actually parts of Impact Man's body, because if you read his bio, you can find out that he's actually made of 4 different robots. And the other 3 he can actually split off from himself to attack you with, so he's attacking you while you're in the stage itself. Now we got this mini block here, excuse me there. It's super weak to block dropper. Basically all you have to do is avoid the claw avoid the claw part. When it reaches all the way out towards the wall, you can stand as close to it as possible, and you'll avoid it. And every once in a while, that traffic cone enemy will fall on top, so he can shoot more missiles at you. Now, here's the hardest section of the stage. If you're not using special weapons, you've got the pickaxe throwing enemies that are going to try and knock you off the wall or off the moving platform, and compared to most other Mega Man games, I don't know if this is also based on the difficulty or not, but Mega Man tends to fly farther back than normal with recoil when he takes damage, as opposed to previous games. I've died here a couple of times on my first playthrough because I underestimated exactly how far you get knocked back if you take damage on the platform. I also don't think I beat Acid Man first before I came here. I can't remember my first playthrough. But using Acid Barrier is very helpful. Just using special weapons here in general is very helpful. It's one of the few games where I can definitively say that most of the special weapons are extremely helpful in this game, and you'll find yourself using them quite a lot. It also helps that all of the special weapons have unique power-ups based on using the power gear and whatnot. And this point here, I think I was trying to see if I could farm off of these missiles, but I don't think you technically can. Oh, and there's a 1-up. Oh good, I do get it. Okay, I forgot if it disappeared or not. But yeah, I was trying to see if I could farm off of the missiles that these traffic cones are dropping or not. I don't think you can. But that's okay. I think here I was trying to go for the energy tank again, but I mistimed my jump there. Oh well. So pretty much now, I've pretty much explained every gimmick about this level, and coming up is probably the hardest part. I would say the part before where you're climbing on the platforms with the traffic cones shooting at you is the hardest, but this part, without the speed gear, is probably the most difficult, because you have to deal with the parts flying at you while you're on moving platforms, and it can be challenging. I'm taking a lot more hits here than I would like, but that's okay. It is what it is. And then you've got these traffic cones that are shooting at you. Always remember that you have speed gear. There's also the energy tank there. It is possible to get that, and what you need to do in order to get it is to use rush coil on this moving platform, which is harder to time than I thought it was, so I just decided to say skip it. Because since you can grind for bolts, you can just buy energy tanks in the shop and you won't have to worry about it. This game is challenging, but I don't think it's too terribly hard. You get a lot of energy tanks. You can grind for bolts to buy more energy tanks in the shop. Oh, careful about this drop here. And I think even the developers realize you're going to take a lot of damage because you have a large life energy capsule right before the boss door here. But yeah, I think the game is relatively challenging. It's not the hardest in the world. I still think Mega Man 10's hard mode is still the hardest Mega Man's ever been. Although the hard mode in Mega Man 11 might be more challenging than that. I'd have to play it myself. But okay, so we're at Impact Man, and Impact Man is very similar to Guts Man, where anytime he lands on the floor or crashes into a wall, he's going to create an earthquake which will knock you over. So you're going to want to make sure you stay in the air when he lands, otherwise you're going to be stunned for a bit. He's also going to transform and drop spikes into the floor, which then you have to avoid. And afterwards they'll explode. Yay. I overused the acid barrier, so I'm out of that, so now I have to fight him the normal way. Boo. But it's okay, because he's not that hard, even without his weakness. Now, here's his powered mode, where this is actually, I find, really difficult to avoid, because anytime he lands on the ground, you have to be in the air to avoid being stunned, but if you are stunned, you're stunned for even longer than before, and he does a lot of damage when he runs into you. Thankfully, though, you basically do the same amount of damage with your charge shot as you do with the acid barrier. And if you have energy tanks, heck, I don't even think I necessarily needed to use that the second energy tank, but I just did it just to be safe. Personally, I think using the Mega Buster is actually a little bit safer than using the acid barrier. But the acid barrier does a decent amount of damage. He's just a lot faster than you expect someone like him to be. That's all. So, either use the powered gear or use the speed gear to avoid his attacks. Again, the stages, or the certain bosses have different names in Japanese. So while our version called him Impact Man, he is actually known as Pile Man in Japanese. That's why this move is called the Pile Driver and not the Impact Driver.
Mega Man. I've made a
Oh yay!
breakthrough.
So I did upgrade the shop after that stage. What's the new thing I got here? There we go. I got the new enemy. I got the new gear upgrade. I also had enough to finally get the energy balancer. But here's the speed gear booster. It allows you to move at normal speed while using the speed gear. Unfortunately, I don't have enough bolts to get that yet, but I'll get that later. The speed gear booster is one of the best items in the game. Oh, excuse me. It's one of the best items in the game, so you're going to want to buy it as soon as possible. As I mentioned before, when you use the speed gear, it actually slows down everything, including Mega Man. But if you have the speed gear booster, it makes Mega Man move at normal speed while everything else is slowed down. So you're definitely going to want to get that as soon as you can. Anyway, that's it for part 2. We'll see you guys for part 3 when I go on to Bounce Man. See you guys then.